They came up and saw there's a car right there in the middle of the road, and so boom, they just tap it lightly, and now the guy gets out relieved. First, he's angry over the lunatic interruption, then he's relieved because he almost got killed. He said it happened car after car. People were mad because we were pulling them over the side of the road till they saw the wreck that they were avoiding. You got to remember that when you're crying an alarm, you have to recognize it's not about whether people like you right now, it's whether or not what you're helping alert people to is important enough to justify the interruption. That makes sense? So I'm back here in the book of Genesis the other day, and I'm saying, so we are shifting into this new mode. It's going to be confrontational at times. We don't want to be confrontational, but it's going to look that way because we're going to have to start to cry out to stop civilization from going over a cliff or wrecking itself. And so I'm thinking about this, and as I'm doing this, I'm remembering about Rebecca, about Rachel and Leah, and I'm thinking, Lord, I'm sensing that this is going to be a big challenge for us. Because, you see, Rebecca was beautiful, and Leah was not the beautiful sister. In fact, the Bible says in Genesis chapter 29, verse 17, Leah was tender-eyed, but Rachel was beautiful. So you got one that wasn't so attractive, the other one's voluptuous. And here's the problem. Revival is Rachel. Reformation is Leah. Nobody wants reformation. If they got a choice, they'd rather have the dynamic meeting with the gold dusted people falling down, the offering overflowing, and a TV contract, and building a new building, and having a big mailing list, and going on to the next super duper Elijah event. Problem is, it doesn't produce lasting change, and it doesn't deal with the existing strongholds in the high places. It's a distraction. So Leah was tender on it. I said, well, Lord, this is true. But then the Lord said to me, he said, but wait a second. Out of Leah, what came forth? Leah conceived. Leah was barren. Jacob had no nations until Leah started producing. We're not going to see nations until we take the revival into Reformation and understand what we're called to reform. But Leah conceived and bare a son. His name was Reuben. Reuben means to see. In the Hebrew, it also means a delicious sandwich with coleslaw and balsamic dressing. Surely the Lord hath looked upon my affliction. And she conceived again and bore a son. And because the Lord heard what was that she was hated, and that this one was called Simeon. So in a sense, it was to see the kingdom show up and to hear the voice of truth. You have to embrace the unwanted sister that is capable of producing the nation you want. That's Reformation, not revival. And she conceived again and bore a son. And this time the son's name was Levi, which we all know means stylish pants. But Levi means to join in the kingdom. And so to see the kingdom, to hear the kingdom, and be joined to the kingdom sets you up for Judah, which is to govern and rule and manifest the kingdom. And here's the point I want to make. Leah, the unwanted sister, produced the seeing, the hearing, the priesthood, and the Messiah himself came out of what was not wanted. It's going to be a complex business. I don't pretend to want to oversimplify it for you to tell you what you have to do, but I'll tell you this. The great moment we're in right now is not about big Christian events, prayer meetings, signs and wonders, revival, and evangelism. I want to caution you about getting distracted by the phenomenology of what we've done for years. It hasn't worked. I looked at the statistics of Benny Hinn, Reinhard Bonnke, Joyce Myers, and Joel Osteen, and Joseph Prince. And what I found out was when I looked at the total impact of their ministries, that the entire world has been saved 3 times already. So that should mean that we really don't have a lot less to do. Except that I don't think those statistics are accurate. Because if all the people are getting touched and saved by television ministries and they're being touched and saved, the world would be the way it is. So here's the reality. The revival culture and the soul-winning culture is actually not the main game in town. Yes. The main game in town right now is nations are in this wobbly, vulnerable state With democracy looking like it's on the ropes, getting taken over in the West, we don't know how long we're going to be able to. We almost lost the country this year. And so it's still a fragile experiment. What I want you to hear is this. Jesus was promised nations. Matthew 25. When the Son of Man returns, he will gather the nations. There will be sheep nations and goat nations. We just got to get this revelation now, because we're still stuck in the phenomenology of revival, looking for soul winning. Jesus wants nations and reformation. Revival and soul winning. Revival is the path to reformation, and soul winning comes out of this reformation movement. Because the gospel is going to go where it hasn't gone.
Right.
We're talking, have you noticed this? A lot of Christian television is Christians talking to themselves.
Yeah.
A lot of Christian conferences are Christians shuffling the deck with different speakers.
Yeah.
I live in this group. First time the devil takes notice of you is when you step outside of the church mountain. And you go to the International Press Club and have a meeting in Washington, D.C. Suddenly they start to record what you're saying. If I talk about Hollywood and Harvey Weinstein, suddenly I'm quoted on left-wing blogs and newspapers. Why? Because they hate it when we go outside and talking to ourselves and start talking and applying ourselves to them. Does that make sense to you? But I want to encourage you with this moment in history, because there are angels that have been assigned to give Jesus his inheritance. Psalm 2 says,
yes.
Ask a man, I'll give you the nations for your inheritance. What is a sheep nation? You have to ask yourself, what is a sheep nation? For how many years has Mark Nuttall been coming up here? And Mark gets up as a statesman, he talks, he's very profound and powerful. And I love Mark Nuttall. And he talks about these 5 principles. But one day I'm starting to listen to him and I'm realizing, oh my God, I got to start paying attention to these divine appointments when I'm around anointed people, that God has me in proximity to them for a reason. When he talks about these 5 pillars of what a true democracy is, America's gift to the world, I realize those 5 pillars are the 5 pillars of what a sheep nation is. So let's just visit a few of them right now. The freedom to worship. The freedom to worship. Religious freedom is one of the characteristics of a sheep nation. Therefore, anywhere we go, we have to go protect the institution of the freedom of worship. There also has to be the eradication of systemic corruption in government, because government is easily tempted to use the opportunity of governing for personal advantage. So you have to have transparency in private transactions in government. There has to be a pressure on exposing corruption in government, so that governments are responsible to the people and that there's no money being made on the side. That should be the goal of every Christian involved in their nation, is to create mechanisms that are going to put pressure on government to expose corruption. Number one problem in our nations that are Christian influenced nations, that are democracies, is corruption is locked in there. Why? Because the church is playing their game over here and the world's playing it over here. We're not over there in their world stopping the corruption. You with me on this?
Yeah.
The freedom of press, the ability to speak the truth without being molested, comes alongside of the freedom of worship, the ability to worship without being molested. And then the ability of government to be transparent. And then a 4th pillar, independent judiciaries. Do you know why? Nobody's going to vote against Putin. No one's going to ever deal with the corruption in Russia, because the judges are afraid of getting shot. They're all on the payroll. In corrupt regimes, the judges are working for the government. Therefore, you don't have a hope of law to ever exist unless the judiciary is free and independent. This isn't just some kind of an American thing and someone else has a better idea. These are fundamental principles of how civilization functions with a Christian influence. What I'm saying is Nuttall actually has a blueprint. Now every nation has to figure out how it's going to do it, and they could always hide and cheat. But the very fact that they subscribe to the ideas means that they're moving in the direction of a sheep nation. What's a goat nation? Have you thought about this? Jesus is going to divide the sheep and the goats. I'll tell you, there's a lot of prophets and sophisticated Christians that haven't thought this thing through. I talked to one great leader. What if I quoted his name to you? You don't know who he is. And he's a prophet. He should know better. He said, I don't think a sheep nation can exist. I said, why do you say that? He said, because a sheep nation to me would be a Christian nation. And I don't think there'll be any Christian nations where everybody's walking with Jesus at the level that I think walking with Jesus is called to, to the millennium. I said, well, then change your definition. A sheep nation isn't where everybody's converted. Talk about being unrealistic on this side of the millennium. Jesus said, broad is the way that leads to destruction, many that go on there. Even he doesn't believe every nation is going to have everybody converted. Here's what he says. He says, as much as you've done to the least of these, my brethren, you've done to me. What does that tell me? For years, I've read Matthew 25, and I made it a social gospel, a guilt trip, because we know I need to go into prison ministry. We need to take care of the homeless. You know, you think you're going to heaven. A lot of people thought they were going to heaven, but they weren't doing social good works, and they weren't taking care of the thirsty, the hungry. You start feeling guilty because on top of everything else you got to do, you got to start figuring out how to reach out to the marginal person in your neighborhood who fell between the cracks of government provisions. The truth is, Jesus wasn't talking social gospel. When the Apostle Paul met Jesus, what did Jesus say? Paul says, "Who are you, Lord?" And Jesus says, "I am Jesus whom you are persecuting." He didn't say, "I'm the founder of the movement you're persecuting." He said, "I take it very personally. I'm the guy you're persecuting. Yeah. I'm Jesus whom you are persecuting." I looked at that and I said, oh, so when Jesus shows up, he says, gathers the sheep and goats and he says, "As much as you've done to them, you've done to me." And I said, that's interesting. It's a different interpretation. In other words, the governments that do not persecute the Christian and the Jew are the governments that actually are sheep nation governments. The governments that move in the direction of silencing, punishing, politically suppressing, finding your religion. This is why the battle is going to be for religious freedom. That's where we got to circle our wagons around that subject. Not around same-sex marriage, not around abortion, around religious freedom, because that's the stand, that's the place where we stand, that if we win that battle, we can influence all of culture. So Jesus was basically saying, in case you didn't get this, goat nations are going to persecute Christians and Jews. Sheep nations will not allow the systemic persecution of Christians and Jews. That's going to be Antichrist and for Christ. And what's happened in America is we've gone from a sheep nation to gradually getting taken over by a pernicious, viral belief system in progressive liberalism that actually has existed in the 60s. It's the same thing. It's a combination of Marxists who want to overturn capitalism to create a redistribution of wealth and the collapse. No nation's ever done that and succeeded. To collapse the strength of the United States globally. It's anarchists that want to just burn everything down and think something new and utopian will come out of the ruins. That's crazy, but that's what Antifa is. And then here's the scary one: it's the establishment elite, which are the Republicans. The third danger, which is they just want peace and prosperity and will pay any price, including the silencing of values or the seduction of culture. They're not a Reformation people either. So where does that leave us? What I'm burdened to say to you is that we have to become educated on the nature of the battle that we're in, because we have to tear down and uproot, and it's not that hard. All you got to do is become educated. Most Christians can't answer 5 simple questions that the left is producing. See, the left is having an evangelism campaign. What we didn't understand is the left is evangelizing the United States. We just think it's politics. Well, I'm not involved in politics. I'm just praying. I'm not going to involve in politics. But you see, that's a stupid framing. The framing isn't about politics or spirit. The framing is the left is engaged in a vigorous evangelistic campaign to make converts. And they're making converts who are getting filled with spirits. It's not the baptism of the Holy Spirit, it's a demonization of culture. And they're getting more and more filled with spirits and false doctrines. I wrote in my books, I think it's more prophetic than you think. Even though the election's over, half the book is a prophetic. The first half of it actually is a book in itself. It says that the angels of light and the false prophets are not, as we thought earlier in life, the Mormons and the Jehovah's Witnesses. See, when you're looking at a church paradigm, your angels of light and false prophets are the other religions competing with yours. The most dangerous false prophets actually become presidents. I think Obama has done more damage as an angel of light than any president we ever had. And the fact that he still learns how to speak a language which is seductively the opposite of everything that he actually does means that there is a smoothness on this guy. Like, he's talking about how it's a shame to see America dividing the way it is, and he was actually one of the guys who orchestrated race and class warfare. Think about that. So what do we have to do? I'm going to just suggest it's not that hard. I listen to Ben Shapiro. The funny thing is, I don't find Christians doing it that easy. You know, there's Jim Garland, there's a few. But I listen to Ben Shapiro. Listen to this 29-year-old, 30-year-old Orthodox Jewish kid with an attitude. And you listen to him go right into town halls or right into Berkeley or any place else. Just take the most rabid, liberal student that wants to come against him, and just right away they'll start with, so you believe a woman that is raped by an escaped criminal should be denied the opportunity of being able to abort that child? Do you believe she should be forced to have that child? And Shapiro sits there and says, let's point something out right now. Whenever the left gives you a question, they always go to the 1% most extreme illustration in order to establish a standard for the other 99% of the applications. And so he educates you right away. He says, so this is typical.